Kaz had to jog to keep up, as Martha took long, quick strides across the room of tubes. The room itself was massive, an easy 100 yards across from her estimations. Kaz followed Martha into a small, doorless room set in the wall. She froze up on entering, looking around in awe at the various prototype prosthetics and cybernetics. A surgical table dominated the center of the room, and the smell of blood hung heavy in the air. Kaz watched with mounting concern as Martha swept the trash and old food containers off a wooden desk, before setting an empty fertilizer bag on top. Like a mumbling whirlwind, the female Geknosion began ripping prototypes from their stands and throwing them into the bag. Eyes, legs, arms, and what could only be described as a cybernetic replacement for a piece of male anatomy entered the large bag. When she was done grabbing the prototypes, she drew the top closed with a string and tied it off. Then, setting it on the floor, she tapped the top of the desk in an oddly familiar rhythm. Tap, tap, smack! After the light smack, the top of the desk lifted up to reveal a computer screen with an overly complex UI. Martha giggled like a madwoman as she dragged and dropped various icons across the screen, until Kaz heard a loud, disgusting gurgling from the tube room. Peeking out, Kaz watched as the cloudy fluid drained out of the bottom of the tubes, bubbles rising slowly through the thick liquid. Then, with an almighty roar, the tubes lit up with intense, bright blue flames that turned the experiments inside into cinders in just a few seconds. Kaz flinched as Martha grabbed her wrist, but the female Geknosion continued marching, pulling Kaz along with a surprising amount of strength. Come on! No time to dilly-dally, Miss Ragamuffin! We need to go before they realize what I've done. A look of deep concern on her face. Kaz followed, trying not to trip on the other woman's thin tail. The female Geknosion led her out of a steel door and into an opulent hallway before letting go of Kaz's wrist. Kaz quickly brought her hand back to the foregrip of her rifle as Martha continued to march forward, bag of prototypes slung over her shoulder. Breaking into a jog to keep up, Kaz followed her up a staircase and towards the sounds of instruments. Getting an inkling of suspicion, Kaz breathlessly asked, "Where are we going, Martha?" The female Geknosion laughed, a tinkling, joyous sound that had a hint of being unhinged. Merrick is hosting a banquet tonight. I'd like to crash it. Kaz blinked rapidly and grabbed Martha's shoulder to stop her, almost getting yanked off her feet as the Geknosion woman paused mid-step. Okay, look. I told you I'd break you out of here, not help you get revenge. Martha regarded Kaz with a slit-pupiled, blank stare, before responding. I don't need your help to crash the banquet. She dug into her robe's pocket, pulled out a small data stick. I've been working on a program that'll force a self-destruct sequence in the security droids. The SDs, as I call them. There's a security terminal in the wall up ahead I can use. Looking at the data stick, Kaz got a foreboding feeling. Martha, how are the SDs powered? Micronuclear reactors, obvious. Oh. Martha started speaking with confidence that quickly turned to stark realization. Then, marching down the lushly carpeted hall, giggling. I guess I'll just reset the security parameters then. That'll be a bloodbath! Kaz pinched the bridge of her nose. Sighing, she began to jog after Martha, quietly on board with the unhinged surgeon's plans. What did I get myself into? She muttered exasperatedly. Kaz was slightly out of breath as she finally caught up to Martha, who was rapidly dragging and dropping icons on a screen that had folded out from the wall. Keeping watch, Kaz grew more and more nervous as Martha continued to work her magic on the terminal. She began to worry about Remen, her imagination running wild with what he could be dealing with while she was away. The squeak of door hinges had her wheeling around, rifle at the ready to put someone down if they were spotted. Her finger froze on the trigger as her crosshairs fell on the shocked face of a little Geknosion boy in dinner attire. She knew she should shoot, knew she had to, but she couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, her body wouldn't let her pull the trigger as she saw the face of her youngest son, instead of the Geknosion boy's. Slowly, Defeatedly, she lowered her rifle, unable to pull the trigger. The little boy seemed to know this, and immediately turned around, slamming the door shut behind him. Barely a few seconds passed before the door burst back open. A Geknosion in a noble's ornate dinner robes appeared, wildly looking around as he brandished a sword. The noble's eyes locked onto Kaz just as she put her crosshairs between them. This time, she didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger, her rifle punching her in the shoulder as half a gram of SP-90 detonated and pushed the Durasteel round down the barrel, down the hall, and into the blade of the noble's sword. Kaz stood stock still. She hadn't even seen the blade move, and yet she could see her bullet embedded in the flat of the sword's triangle-shaped blade. The noble blinked, and his slit-pupiled eyes turned the shiny black of cameras as he casually ripped the sleeve off of his sword arm to reveal a cybernetic arm, seamlessly attached at his shoulder. "You must be Kaz, the markswoman," he stated, his voice as calm, collected, and calculated as a machine's. "What are you doing with my surgeon?" he inquired softly. Kaz didn't respond, quickly moving her hand to work the bolt of her rifle. But the noble was fast. Too fast. The noble launched down the hallway with a leap that ripped up the carpeting. Kaz quickly brought her gun up, using it to block the sword's blade. To her utter disbelief and despair, the rifle burst in two at the bolt, making sparks fly as the sword's tip narrowly missed her throat. Stumbling back, she stared at the noble with unabashed fear. Her rifle split cleanly in two from the strike. Shakily, she dropped the pieces. "Throat dry?" she asked. What are you?" The noble grinned, revealing metal teeth and a jaw that was entirely not a normal Geknosions. "That's rude. I'm not an object, though I'll forgive you for the faux pas. My name is Damien Scaleheart." The noble swept into a deep bow before continuing. "You see, I was once a human like you, but after hundreds of painful surgeries, operations, and genetic modification, I became one of the superior beings." Damien cocked his head, his smile turning lascivious as Kaz felt those camera eyes were looking through her clothing. "You would have made a beautiful Geknosion, Kaz. One I'd have to keep all to myself, no matter how they struggled." Kaz's fear dissipated in an instant. Memories of the monster that had forced himself onto her, and the breeding camp she'd been sent to afterwards flooding her mind. A white, hot rage began building in her stomach as she pulled a grapple hook out of her pocket, keeping the loops of cordage in her left, and wielding the hook like a claw in her right. Damien's voice going up a breathless octave on the last word of his sentence. Kaz bared her teeth, remembering the pain, the helplessness, the vulnerability, and how her body had betrayed her during that awful night. "You'll have to kill me first," she growled, watching as Damien's grin grew, his words taking on a lustful, breathless tone. "That can be arranged. It's not fun without at least a little struggle." Damien rocketed forward, sword flashing towards Kaz's throat.